What we should do in Vietnam. We have been trying to defend South Vietnam against communism since 1954, yet communism seems stronger than ever. Why? Though President Johnson has committed us to sacrifice our fighting men, he rejects victory and promises to withdraw and give communist aid if they will promise to abide by agreements which they have violated since 1954. We are so deeply involved now, we should go ahead and win. This could be done quickly for much less blood and treasure than we are now squandering. We should give Chiang Kai-shek our blessing to strike communist China as he pleases and divert to him all foreign aid already promised to others. When the communist regime of North Vietnam collapses, we should get out of Asia, leaving Asians to fight their own wars in their own way. That is a summary of my report on what we should do in Vietnam. The full report after a message from my sponsor. Communists, pro-communist, pacifists, ultra-liberals, and assorted beatniks and idiots who oppose our Vietnam war on grounds that it is an evil aggression against the Vietnam people have been immensely helpful to President Johnson. Their opposition has misled many Americans into believing the President's Vietnam policy must be right because its noisiest critics are so obviously wrong. Many see the glaring inconsistency of fighting communism 10,000 miles away while refusing to fight it in Cuba and while coddling communists at home. They know that President Johnson's Vietnam policies are dragging us into a disaster that can be even worse than Korea was. But they fear to criticize lest they thus align themselves with leftists who criticize for pro-communist reasons. To understand what the United States should do in Vietnam, we need to review steps which took us to the present deadly impasse. On August 8, 1945, 6 days before the United States forced Japanese surrender, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. On August 9, 3 Soviet armies moved into Manchuria. While there, they set up a communist puppet state in North Korea and armed Chinese communists with Japanese and American equipment. From their Manchurian base, Chinese communists intensified their war against Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang resisted American demands that he negotiate with communists until George Marshall forced him to comply. The result was communist conquest of China in 1949. In June 1950, communists attacked South Korea. President Truman sent American troops to drive communists out and to unify Korea under the anti-communist government of Syngman Rhee. Washington and United Nations officialdom would not, however, let Americans and South Koreans win. In July 1953, after 54,246 Americans had died, President Eisenhower accepted a Korean armistice on communist terms. The Eisenhower administration asserted that we had stopped communist conquest in Asia and vowed to protect French Indochina from communists. Communists promptly converted scattered guerrilla action against French Indochina into total war, and in May 1954 drove the French out. An international conference divided the old French Union into 4 nations: neutral Cambodia, neutral Laos, neutral South Vietnam, and communist North Vietnam. Communists promised to disperse their rebel groups in Laos, Cambodia, and South Vietnam, and to respect the neutrality of those 3 nations, but of course did not. In 1955, the Eisenhower administration decided to make its next firm stand against Asian communism in Laos. The Laotian economy went on the American dole. After 5 years, our side seemed to be winning. So the Soviets suggested an international conference to settle the trouble. They wanted to switch the war from battlefield to conference table, where anti-communists could be forced to form a coalition government with communists. In 1961 and 1962, Averell Harriman did what George Marshall had done in China 15 years before: forced the anti-communist government to surrender control to a communist-dominated coalition. While thus forcing Laos to submit to communism, the Kennedy administration, early 1962, announced that the determined stand against communism would be made in South Vietnam in cooperation with the Diem government. On November 1st, 1963, Diem, apparently at the instigation of our own government, was overthrown and murdered, and the tide of victory started running for the communists. In February 1965, President Johnson revealed that he had authorized bombing in North Vietnam, previously a privileged sanctuary for communists. 2 full months of the bombing apparently did little damage to the communist enemy. On April 7, 1965, President Johnson took another bold step. He virtually offered the communists a $1 billion bribe if they would quit fighting to negotiate. They sneered. By December 1965, United States troops in Vietnam had increased to almost 200,000 from 3,000 in December 1961, and signs were ominous that commitment of our men in Vietnam may soon double our commitment at the peak of the Korean War. Yet on December 10, Ho Chi Minh, president of Communist North Vietnam, saying he would never accept President Johnson's repeated proposal for unconditional discussions, confidently boasted that North Vietnam could fight the United States for another 20 years or longer. We have been trying to defend South Vietnam against communism since 1954, yet communism seems stronger than ever. Their weapons are as abundant and as good as ours, and the battles seem to be growing ever bigger and bloodier. What's wrong? Though President Johnson has committed us to sacrifice our fighting men in unspecified and unlimited numbers, and has promised to spend the material resources of our nation no matter the consequences, he has not committed us to win the war in Vietnam. President Johnson rejects victory as an objective. It is probable that if our armies ever reach the point where victory over communists seems imminent, they will be stopped by our own government as they were in Korea. The communist objective is total conquest. Ours is accommodation. Excepting 3 December bombing raids which failed to destroy 1 power complex near Hanoi, we are using our air power against jungle trails, villages, small troop concentrations, and isolated supply depots. We even refrained from knocking out surface-to-air missile installations when we knew the Soviets were moving in missiles for use against our planes. We knocked out some of them after our planes had been shot down. We have not used any of our best new weapons, and have even shortchanged our soldiers in conventional supplies and weapons of war. President Johnson promises that we will quit and give North Vietnam aid as soon as the communists promise to abide by the agreement of 1954, which they have been violating since the day it was made. What do the communists have to lose in the Vietnam War as now conducted? Mostly men, and the manpower available to Asian communists is almost limitless. They have us at the end of a 10,000-mile supply line, draining us of manpower and resources. Every day they can prolong the war, they enhance their prestige by holding their own against powerful America. If they grow tired, they can stop and go on the American dole until they're rested, rebuilt, and ready to go again. Though a protracted, limited war in Vietnam can bleed us to death, an American victory would be relatively easy. Our Air Force Chief of Staff says the United States has the military capability of destroying North Vietnam and forcing its surrender virtually overnight. Now, this would cost fewer American lives than the bloody ground fighting is costing. But President Johnson prevents such action for what he calls political and humanitarian reasons. Destroying the communist regime of North Vietnam would not, however, stop communist aggression in Asia, because the fountainhead of communist troublemaking and power in Asia is in China, not in North Vietnam. Fighting limited wars against communist puppet states in Asia weakens us, strengthens communism. It feeds communist propaganda mills with fodder about American imperialistic aggression. It gives communist armies training and experience in the use of modern weapons. Each limited war is concluded with a negotiated truce, which gives the communists essentially what they were fighting for in the first place. This stimulates them to make further conquests and gives credence to their taunt that America is a paper tiger which roars but never wins. Communist aggression in Asia will never be stopped while communists control mainland China. Chiang Kai-shek, president of Free China, commands powerful armed forces and wants to fight communism in Asia at its source, the Chinese mainland. He says that if permitted to fight, he positively will not ask help from the United States. We are now so deeply involved in Vietnam that we ought to go ahead and win as quickly as possible, using our best weapons to minimize the loss of American lives. We should announce that Chiang Kai-shek has our blessing to move against Communist China as he pleases. We should stop all foreign aid and divert to Chiang Kai-shek all foreign aid materials that are in the process of production or shipment. As soon as our offensive in North Vietnam causes the communist government there to collapse or surrender, we should prepare to get out of Asia at our convenience and leave Asians to manage their own affairs and fight their own wars in their own way. It is not our responsibility to defend Asia. That is a job for Asians. If there are not enough Asians willing and able to fight for their own freedom, then Asia cannot be saved, regardless of how many American lives are sacrificed. We simply do not have the manpower to send to Asia to fight limited or total wars to save Asia from anything. We have no business standing as the policeman and guardian of the rest of the world while minimizing the protection of our own homeland. The resources that we are now squandering in foreign wars and on the defense of foreign people and for the uplift of foreign people should be concentrated on the vital defenses of the United States, which are being neglected. For the printed report on which this broadcast is based, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 541, What We Should Do in Vietnam. 6 copies, $1. This is Dan Smoot. Goodbye. God bless you.